Hello, my name is Rachel Tucker, and I'm going to discuss with you why the newly elected Islamists are better than past dictators. So did you know that 80% of Muslims worldwide want an Islamic democracy, according to recent polls? Well, so did the United States, or so they thought. Despite the United States government's support for democracy around the world, with the new elected Islamic Democrats, the United States may be changing their mind. The newly elected Islamists have more of a dislike for the U.S. than the earlier dictators did. However, even though these new officials have a newfound dislike for the U.S., democracy may be able to liberalize the Arab Middle East and Arab Africa and introduce them to the positive outcomes of state leadership rather than create a greater sense of anti-Westernization and radicalization. So imagine radical groups, possibly Al-Qaeda or ISIS, begin a plan to start nuclear warfare with the United States. You'd be affected, and that's prevalent to you. Now also imagine that the tense relations between the United States and the Arab world, as well as intervention with military personnel, are eased and healthy communication between the two nations is created. This would benefit U.S. citizens, especially college students such as yourselves, as well as people in the Arab world, in ways such as the reduced cost of gas because of access to oil. So after researching countless first-hand accounts of the relations between the Arab world and the United States, the thoughts of Islamic citizens, and statistics of beneficial outcomes of a democracy of Islamists, I'm confident in my ability to illustrate to you why in the Middle East and parts of North Africa, elected Islamists are better than their past dictators. I'm going to discuss with you three main points. My first point is that religion is a huge aspect of the citizens in the Arab world. And even though there's a separation of church and state in a democracy, it could possibly aid it because the major religion, which is Muslim, would be able to bring everyone together. My second main point is that many Muslims that have lived with a dictator are familiar with that way of life. However, with the new emerging generations, a more liberal and free nation is beginning to form, as well as more ideals regarding religious freedom. And religious freedom coincides with a democracy as well as a better world. My third point is that the results of the Arab Spring, which was a huge uprising of Muslims in many different Arab nations for many different reasons, were both horrific and unforgettable. And due to such an impactful event in the Arab world, it is understandable that the emergence of a new government could help ease the tensions between different groups, as well as help modernize the Middle Eastern and North African world. Now I will discuss my first point as to why religion in Islamic nations may be helpful for a democratic government. So, religion is a huge aspect of people living in places such as Israel, Turkey, and Northern Africa. These locations are considered part of the Arab world, and in surveys conducted by Pew Research Center, all of the respondents in the report made about the world's Muslims, religion, politics, and society includes data on every nation with a Muslim population of more than 10 million, excluding a few countries. In total, the 39 countries and territories included in the survey are home to about 2/3 of all Muslims in the world. The median percentage of Muslims in the Middle East/North Africa who believe that religious leaders should have political influence is 65%. This comes as no surprise, since religion is so prominent in these regions. However, since this number is only a little over half, it shows that Muslims are willing to resort directly to democracy. They are willing to live in a world with the separation of church and state. However, it also means that with the influence of religion over democracy, the nations may be actually run smoother, since it is one predominant religion and it will bring the people together. Now that we identified the impact that religion would have on a democratic government, I will point out the reasoning behind the certain poll numbers and why the new generations of Muslims will create a better state for a democratic government. To illustrate my next point, I will discuss another survey taken by Muslims in the Middle East and North Africa. Although the median percent of Muslims who prefer democracy over a strong leader is 55%, this does not mean that the number may have increased since the past, and that the number may begin to increase as people understand the concept of democracy. Many Muslims in these areas also agree about a median of 85%, that religious freedom is a good thing. Therefore, the Muslim people are even closer to the ideals of a democratic society. In taking a statistics course right now, the number of 55%, this number could be skewed with numbers that are higher or lower than 55%. Therefore, a number that is significantly lower than the mean or significantly higher than the mean could greatly impact what the median actually is. So 55% may not actually describe the ideas about the rest of the people in the sample. So after pointing out the beneficial use of a government in modern-day Middle East and Northern Africa in regards to the biggest aspect of those nations' lives, which is religion, I will now explain why it is so difficult for older generations of Muslims and more conservative groups to accept this change to a democracy. Because of the results of the Arab Spring, there is a fear of a return to the violence. The author of the book Islam and the Arab Awakening, Tariq Ramadan, states that the outcome is unclear. More time will be needed before the past can be forgotten and open, pluralistic, democratic societies can emerge. One main reason is that time is needed because of the huge emotional impact it had on the people of the Arab world. The differences between the Shia and the Sunni created huge conflicts that resulted in proxy wars. And in Egypt, there were uprisings where women were sexually assaulted in public, just because they were demanding their own personal freedoms. And they were doing this alongside men who were demanding their political rights, which was actually the focus of the protests. The reasons for these protests were because of the long-standing corrupt elites, the dictators, and actions such as a street vendor who burned himself to death, which led governments to collapsing and autocratic presidents to fleeing. A huge reason for the uprisings was secularism. It is known that in democratic governments, there is a separation of church and state. However, within these countries, it is viable to work. The freedoms of citizens were violated, and because of this, there were protests. Some violent, as much as a man burning himself alive. It is obvious that these events are hard to forget, and it is even hard to accept a new government that has similar beliefs to an autocratic president. However, a democratic government with elected Islamists could easily work its way into the Islamic lifestyle. So let's review what was learned in this presentation about the use of a democratic government in the Arab world today, and why it is better than previous dictators. We have discussed the religious aspect of a government, and how the separation of church and state can be negated in the case of these countries, along with the reasons for opposition to the government, and the difficulty in letting go of the results of the Arab Spring, and to accept a new government. In conclusion, the elected Islamist officials in the Middle East, Northern Africa, and other parts of the Arab world will eventually become settled in, and the effects of the Arab Spring will wear off as newer generations begin to accept a democracy that is still influenced by the Muslim religion. However, still accepts the freedom of religion. In turn, because of this switch to a democracy, the Arab world will modernize and begin to accept westernized and democratic ideas that will aid the country both politically and economically.